Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. It's a slow period in the sports world, but there's still a little something to go around as I'll get into all that the landscape has to offer, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And just a quick housekeeping note that I want to bring up here. My second critique video is now up on YouTube. That's right, at JAYREELZ on YouTube. If you could go check it out, I sincerely appreciate it. And I get it that we're up to our eyeballs and beyond when it comes to content surrounding LeBron James. But I did see this one content creator, which I thought was pretty clever on his part, to kind of dissect the direction that the offseason could go if the Lakers do not stockpile. Maybe that's a little bit too strong, but there could be a possibility that LeBron could be a New York Knick. Could you imagine, Knick fans? I know it's 15 years too late in my eyes, as you'll hear in this video. It's about an 8-minute video, but it's his breakdown of how he could see a path for LeBron James coming to New York. So check that out, again, on the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. I would sincerely appreciate it. And it's really interesting content on his part, although I have a couple of things I need to say about that because it's a little, not outlandish, I won't go as far as saying that, but you have to see for yourself. And please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. We'll go back and forth on that. Now, let's get right to it. Baseball, the All-Star break is forthcoming. This is the final weekend before the All-Star break. I know the quote-unquote first half, as we dreadfully say around this time, where most of these teams have played, in essence, 91, 92, 93 games. And by the time you get to the end of the weekend, it's going to be in the mid to upper 90s. But there are a couple of things that I'll have to put forth here. One that I'm going to leave you with a little teaser, and I guess I'll start there. The teaser being that with the first half coming to a close, and on Monday I'll recap that first half. And the one thing that I'll ask you, whether you're the big-time sports fan, the diehard baseball fan, or even a good baseball fan, is what do you extract from these first 90 games? I understand that it is a marathon. We could certainly look at some of the top storylines and some of the teams that have been surprises, disappointments, etc. And yes, you do have some notable things to discuss, whether it's the Tigers and their success after piggybacking on that 31-11 run to close out the regular season and how they just come out like bandits and arguably are the best team in Major League Baseball. But between that and a National League that right now it's looking a little bit dicey from the standpoint of which team do you really trust when you get to the end of the season? Do you trust the Mets or the Phillies there in the National League East, the Cubs, who have certainly had a big year to date? Can they get to the finish line of a regular season and maybe make some noise in October? And then the second storyline that I want to get to, besides that teaser of the first half, and I'll unpack that more, so you have to come back on Monday to get your full 30,000-foot view of what we could surmise about what has taken place here from, March 27th through, at that point, it'll be July 14th. But the other thing is the Dodgers. And with the NL West, I'm sure they're going to be fine, and that's going to be my gut as of right this very moment. But they're in the midst of a 6-game losing streak. We talked about it on Monday, how the Astros went into Chavez Ravine, and they just steamrolled them. We know about the 18-1 game, the worst Dodger loss at home in their history, especially out in LA. That's not including Brooklyn, of course. And then they proceeded to lose 6-4 and 5-1, and then they go to Milwaukee, and they could barely scratch out a run. And when you look at the 6-game losing streak, to think, in 4 of those games, they've only scored 1 run. And they scored 10 runs overall. They scored the 4 runs, like I mentioned, in the middle game against the Astros over the weekend. And then they scored 2 runs yesterday in a loss where Jackson Chourio got the game-winning hit from Milwaukee. And the Brewers, who have played pretty well and trying to battle it out with the Cubs there. But you have to think, if you're a Dodger fan, right, this is the ebbs and flows of a season. Are you going to get so worked up or so carried away to the extent where, oh, geez, the sky's falling? What's happening here? The Giants have actually played well despite their loss yesterday. And the Padres are going to, you would think, start to come around a little bit. But I would look at it as not trying to push the panic button. despite the fact that they haven't scored, they haven't hit. I know Freddie Freeman, who was up amongst the ranks of the top hitters in the National League when it comes to average, is now below 300. And even though Shohei Ohtani hit a home run the other day against Jacob Misiorowski, who had that 12 strikeout performance and has pitched well here throughout the start of his career, albeit that one Met loss at Citi Field last week. But the Dodgers, yes, is there some concern? Do you have maybe, I won't go as far as saying worry, because you know they're going to make it to the postseason whether they win the NL West or not. And I think they're going to win the NL West. I don't think this is a thing where you have to raise an eyebrow. They're just going through a terrible slump, and it just comes at a bad time considering that they're going to head into the All-Star break. Let's see if they go on to their next series and try to capitalize to where at least they can feel good about themselves going into the All-Star break, where I'm sure they're going to have a big giant exhale and they could certainly look around and say, all right, well, this is where we're at. And funny enough, they have a big series against the Giants this weekend, who are right behind them in the division, albeit at 5 games, maybe 5.5. Let me just take a look at that. No, I think it's 5, because even with the Giants, who had a 4-game winning streak snapped yesterday against the Phillies, who won 13-0 out at Oracle. And with the Dodgers, of course, like I mentioned, losing yesterday, the Dodgers do have a 5-game lead. So even if the Giants, where they sweep and really put some pressure on LA, they'll still be 2 back heading into the break. So if I'm a Dodger fan, yeah, I gotta have maybe a bead of sweat saying, what the hell's going on? What's happening? But we've seen this with the Dodgers early on in the season, right around the early part of May, where they were scuffling after that 8-0 start. And I would think when all is said and done, they're going to win the division, I would think handily. I'm not going to say by how many games right now, but considering that they've gotten off to a pretty sizable lead and now it's been cut a little bit by the Giants, but they could certainly right the ship, win 2 out of 3 this weekend to gain a game, and then they could certainly go on their merry way, have a little bit of a respite. I know the Freddie Freemans and the Shohei Ohtanis and guys like that who are going to be a part of the All-Star festivities in Atlanta, and that's a bit of a homecoming there for Freddie Freeman, which obviously he's been back to Atlanta since his days when he played in Atlanta. But the overall picture here with the Dodgers, I'm certainly not going to be overly worried or even concerned about this team, because I think they'll be fine. Now, even if they get swept over the weekend, let's just say, and they're 2 back, right, you could probably look at that and say, that's certainly not a good sign. You're not going to go into the All-Star break losing 9 in a row if you're the Dodgers. Now, could you imagine that? And I can't see that happening. I don't care what the pitching matchups are. I don't care if Juan Marichal and guys like that are going to be on the mound against that Dodger lineup over the weekend. But I cannot see the Dodgers, who start off the season, like I mentioned, 8-0, and then close out these quote-unquote first half at 0-9. So even if they lose a game here along the way and they lose the series, they will have a situation where they'll still be 4 games ahead of the Giants, and still, no need to worry, no need to panic, maybe a bit of concern. Now, I know they got Tyler Glasnow back yesterday, who pitched okay in his return, and you would only hope that right behind him will be Blake Snell and maybe Roki Sasaki, although I believe his injury is a little bit more extensive and will have to be put on a shelf a little bit longer than we would have thought. But for the Dodgers, they have so many resources, and I would not be surprised if by any chance, and I don't think they will, but maybe get a reinforcement along the way. Their bullpen is loaded, their rotation, as we know, is stacked, and their lineup, maybe they'll have a tweak or 2 here, considering that they've gone into a tailspin offensively. Who knows? The trade deadline is still 2.5, 3 weeks away, so I wouldn't think that the sky is falling in LA, or even outside of that if you're a Dodger fan, if you really think that, oh geez, the Giants are going to be nipping on our heels. Now, let's see what happens this weekend. If they sweep them, they'll be nipping at their heels. But even then, I still have to see the Giants play over the moon throughout the rest of the season in order for them to be a division champ. And with that being said, if that's the case, the Dodgers are still going to get into the postseason. So I will not be in any way, shape, or form surprised if they don't win a division. I guess I would be a little bit, but if they don't make the playoffs, that would be the shocker of all time. So still plenty of baseball to be played. I know the Dodgers are the story right now, considering how they're playing recently, and now they got a big series against the Giants. So you know I'll be on top of that, and we'll recap that come Monday. Now, other Major League news to discuss. I know you had the Red Sox who were playing well. Now, they swept the Nationals and Rockies back-to-back, so that was pretty much taking candy away from a baby. And the Red Sox, as we know, they've been up and down in and out the Devers trade and trying to find their footing, and the young guys trying to gel and see if they can make their mark. And right now, they're 3 games over 500. They are 6 back of the Blue Jays in the division. But the Red Sox, let's see if they can keep this train going, because that is now becoming a very uber competitive division. And who would have thought, considering that the Yankees had a 7-game lead in the middle to the latter part of May, and now that they did gain a half game in the standings with Toronto losing to the White Sox yesterday, actually a full game, and then the Yankees will play today where the Blue Jays will have a day off. So let's see if the Yankees could creep that lead or cut that lead to 2. So with the Red Sox playing well, we'll take a look at the schedule. I know I blew it the other day. I did not even go through the early part of the week's schedule to kind of set the stage for what's going to happen this weekend. But I promise you, I will talk about what's going to happen here this weekend as we take a look at the landscape or a lay of the land of what baseball will have over the next few days. But besides that, there isn't really much. Could I talk about Miguel Cairo now being the interim manager of the Washington Nationals? We talked about on Monday how Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez were both ousted. We know they have a bunch of very good young players that they could certainly build around, but they have not been able to play, other than James Wood, who's the all-star representative for the Nationals there come Tuesday. But besides that, Dylan Cruz and guys like C.J. Abrams, led by Mackenzie Gore, who is the ace of that staff. And it's going to take some time. Now, I'm sure with them being in last place behind both the Marlins and the Braves at this point, that was the reason why they pulled the plug on the GM and manager. But now Miguel Cairo, the longtime player, played both with the Yankees and Mets and bounced around Cardinals, among other teams. So let's see what he does there as they try to pick up the pieces in the nation's capital. And then you have the Yankees, who now have righted the ship a little bit to where they've won 3 in a row. They've beaten the Mariners here in back-to-back games, and they're putting up big-time offensive numbers. We saw that over the weekend against the Mets, where they put up 5, 6, and 7 runs in each of those 3 games. They put up a 10 spot Tuesday night when they beat the Mariners 10-3, and last night they put up 9 runs. So they've put up a ton of runs here, which is what the Yankees do. They're a bully offense, let's face it. When they're clicking, maybe not every batter, but when they're on fire, that's when they put up tons of home runs. Jazz Chisholm, who got the move from third base to second, hit up 2 home runs there last night. I believe he had a home run the night before. So now he could settle in his natural position where they DFA'd DJ LeMahieu, and that was a tough conversation, and more than one between the manager and the GM. Both Aaron Boone and Brian Cashman knew that this was going to be a very tough call for a guy who early on was an MVP candidate for the American League when he came to the team there in 2019 and 20. And then after that, the injury bug hit him, could not stay in the lineup, could not be consistent, was a far cry from what we saw when he became a Yankee there in the late 20-teens. And unfortunately, with still a year and a half left to go on his contract, the Yankees just decided to cut bait, and maybe DJ LeMahieu could go elsewhere and maybe find a spot on the team that, who knows, could help a young team try to get into a wild card race or maybe into a division for that matter. So who knows what's going to happen with him. But that was the right call. Now the Yankees will probably look for a third baseman by the deadline, because Oswaldo Peraza, though a good player, but I'm sure they want to have somebody a little bit more stable and a guy that with a right-handed bat, Eugenio Suarez, anyone from the Reds, but that's if the Reds are willing to part with them, because the Reds are a fringe wild card team at the present moment. But the Yankees, I'm sure they'll do their due diligence to see what they could do as they try to get themselves together to get back to the top of the AL East, considering that they've been floundering as of this past Sunday, because since then they've won 3 in a row, and who knows. With the Cubs coming to town over the weekend, which will be a little bit of a historic matchup with the 2 old teams, and maybe a better test at Seattle, because Seattle, they are paper tigers. They got off to that great start, and for them, that looked like they were going to be in first place, mano a mano with the Astros, but they had just passed them standing still. So now the Mariners are kind of looking around to see what they're going to do, and they certainly need some upgrades offensively, because other than Cal Raleigh, who hit his 36th home run the other night at Yankee Stadium, Julio Rodriguez has certainly regressed. He has not been the guy that was paid to, $200 some odd million over the next 10 years or so, and has certainly fallen short of that. And they don't really have a big offensive team. The J.P. Crawfords of the world aren't going to scare you, among others. So that's what you have there with the baseball for the most part, because other than that, there really isn't anything else to dive into with what happened here over the last few days. Now, I know you had that wild game in San Francisco, talking about the Giants the other day, where they had that walk-off 3-run inside the park home run in the ninth inning by Patrick Bailey, which helped out the Mets in that regard. And the Mets haven't played since Tuesday, which they had a big win against the Orioles, where they were down 6-2, and they got 2 two-run homers from Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso to tie the game, and then Juan Soto got the base knock in the 10th that drove in a run, and we know that he's had trouble hitting with runners in scoring position, so hopefully that'll be a building block for what's to come here in the second half. And I know we could talk about him being snubbed as an all-star. I could care less because I do not watch the all-star game. I haven't watched the all-star game. I talked about this on the live stream yesterday. And if you're unaware, people, I have a live stream on YouTube every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern time, that was discussed where I have a little bit of an interaction, not a little bit, a lot of an interaction with the people in the chat room. Check it out. It's on my YouTube channel, and it is very good. So please indulge yourself in watching that type of content where I go back and forth with the fans, which I love. And that's the whole part of this, where with the podcast, I just record it, post it, and away I go. But as far as Soto with his comments, he came out and said that, oh, how do you feel about the snub? He goes, oh, hey, I'm losing out on money. And I'm paraphrasing there. Juan, you just signed the richest contract in professional sports history. And to make the All-Star team is $100,000. $100,000 for you is like finding a quarter on the street. And I understand. You want to get every nickel as long as you're wearing a Major League Baseball uniform. But you could say, hey, those are the breaks. Maybe I'll get it next year, or maybe somebody will bow out due to injury and I could get penciled in. And that still could happen here over the next few days. And he'll get his 100,000. But obviously it's a just terrible look on his part, because really he's going to not necessarily cry, but he's going to make a mention that he's losing out on money by not making the All-Star team. I mean, no one is going to cry you a river or even shed you a tear. And that's my guy on my team. So for him to say that, and listen, he's being honest, and you like his honesty and him being transparent in that regard, but it certainly comes off not so good in the grand scheme of things, considering that people are just literally scratching and clawing, just trying to make a living and make ends meet, when here's a guy that's making annually, on average, $51 million a year, and for $100,000, he's going to say, hey, well, I'm losing out on money here. So that's not a good look there on Soto, if you ask yours truly. But as far as the standings, I know I talked about the wild card day the other day. I'm not going to break down anything of significance. Now, obviously, Dodgers-Giants, although I think the Dodgers will be fine. But other than that, between the AL West, NL West, and AL Central, to me, those are going to be locks eventually, I would think. The AL East and NL East, that could be a Royal Rumble to the end, as we know. And as far as the NL Central, let's see if the Brewers now, with a 2 in the loss and a game and a half behind the Cubs, where, like I mentioned, the Brewers have done an excellent job here, where they have won 5 of the last 6, and they just finished polishing the Dodgers and sweeping them back to San Francisco, where they have a series this weekend, as you know. So that's pretty much what I have. And on the wild card, as we know, the National League looks a little bit more stacked, because when you have teams like the Brewers, Giants, Padres, Cardinals, and even the Reds to a lesser degree. Now, I know the Reds are right now a game over 500, and they're 3 in the loss and 3.5 back. You have to include them. And I know the Diamondbacks are a game under and 4.5 back. And even with the Marlins, 7.5, well, I'm not going to include the Marlins. That's now they're 7.5 back. That's way too far behind. But those teams there, obviously it's a lot more competitive when you look at those teams, whereas in the American League, it's pretty much Seattle, Red Sox, who are nipping at their heels. Then you have Royals, Twins, Angels. But the problem with that is, and even Texas and the Guardians, but the problem with that is that a lot of these teams are 2, 3, 4, 5 games under 500. And if you want to take a team seriously, you want them to be at least at 500 or better. And thankfully, this is not like the NBA, at least so we hope, where a team is not going to be a 6th seed in the American League at 79 and 83. Because then I'm sure there are going to be a lot of rumblings, not to say that there's going to be changes made, because the 6 playoff teams are going to be what it is moving forward. But as far as the competitive balance, it just goes to show you that even if a team gets in at 81 and 81, it's going to be looked upon with a side eye. Because, yeah, you can make it where you're 83 and 79 or 84 and 78. And there have been teams that have won World Series. Look at the 2006 Cardinals, where they won 83 games. And the Mets made it to a World Series in 73 when they won 82 games. But that is few and far between. Hopefully this isn't a situation where this becomes a norm and we still have another few months of baseball to be played. So when the dust settles and when we get to see who qualifies for the postseason, hopefully these teams will be at least a handful of games over 500 instead of hovering at, or God forbid, below that. something to keep in mind, and that's even part of the teaser as I close out the baseball segment when it comes to Major League Baseball. And when we get to Monday's podcast, I will certainly have an overview of the first half, the surprises, disappointments. I'll even talk about my over-under teams, which I took a look at yesterday, and right now it's okay. I'll just leave it at that, so I'll leave the suspense for over the weekend. Now, as far as the schedule goes, here's what we have. We have a bunch of games today. Mets have to play the Orioles in a double dip. They'll go 12:05 and then 5:05. And remember, they got to go to Kansas City afterwards, so it's going to be a long day and then travel for the Mets when it comes to that. Now, you have teams that are concluding a lot of 3-game series, but you have some 4-game series starting off with Tampa and Boston. That's a big series coming into the weekend because Boston's trying to inch closer to the top of the division. And obviously, whatever ground that they can make against Tampa, if they can win 3 out of 4, they'll gain 2 games in the standings. Obviously, the last thing they want is a split. And who knows, with what's happened here recently with division rivals, especially in the AL East, we look back to last week when Toronto swept the Yankees and overtook them for first place and have stayed there since. And maybe could Boston do somewhat the same, although Tampa's not in first place, but maybe if they have a sweep in order, they could surpass them and then look at the Yankees and even the Blue Jays ahead of them in the standings. So that's one series we'll certainly keep an eye on. You also have Cleveland playing in Chicago. That's a 4-game set. Other 4-game series of note is, no, they're going to go to Houston this weekend. All right, so now let's look at the game starting tomorrow. You have Cubs and Yankees. That's a good series. One to keep an eye on there. Then you have Seattle at Detroit. Tampa at Boston, as you know. Texas at Houston. Atlanta at St. Louis. Philly at San Diego. Good series there as they come down the coast from San Francisco. Toronto, they're playing out in Sacramento against the Athletics. You know about Dodgers and Giants. You have some very good series to look at here. I mean, you have Cubs-Yankees. I understand it's AL-NL, but still. You have Seattle-Detroit. Seattle trying to make their way in Detroit. Obviously the best team in the American League as of right now. Then you have Philly-San Diego. LA at San Francisco. So you have some series that you could chew on here where once we get back to Monday and then Texas at Houston, in-state rivals, is Texas trying to find their way. And what is Texas now? Behind in the standings? I think they're 8 games. Let me just take a quick peek at that. But you do have some series that at least you can look forward to over the weekend to whet the appetite when it comes to baseball. No, they're actually 10 back. I thought they were 8 back. Oof. My apologies there. But they're in the wild card race, as you know. So we'll certainly see what's going to happen here over the weekend as we get to Monday's podcast. And then, of course, the All-Star break where, as I mentioned before, one last time, Monday, a first half recap. And then a week from today, as we get ready for the second half, I'll look into my crystal ball to see what we have for the second half of the season as we approach the Midsummer Classic there in baseball. All right, now I'm going to turn my attention as I take off the cleats, get out of the batter's box, and get in between the white lines with the tennis racket and the tennis shoes because Wimbledon is coming down to its final few days, and it's riveting to say the least. Now, you have matches that are in place right now that, as I speak, that are going on. And right now, you have a situation where Aryna Sabalenka is going up against Amanda Anisimova, and Anisimova is currently, I believe it won the first set, and they were in the second set. Let me see if I can pull up a score here real quick. So I want women's singles, because obviously the women's right now are in the semifinals, and then you'll have the final on Saturday where the men's will have their semifinal tomorrow, and then, of course, they'll have the final there on Sunday. But for women's, and I don't know why I'm not getting the women's, here we go, women's singles. Well, let's get right to it because I don't know why this isn't popping up here, and I'm curious as to why I am not seeing a score here. All right, let's get the women's, please. Women's. There we go. Anisimova going up right now against Aryna Sabalenka. Anisimova won the first set 6-4. I tried to peek in while I was preparing for the podcast to see what was going on. And now Sabalenka has a 5-4 advantage in the second set. This looks like this could be a thriller. It's going to go right to the finish. If Sabalenka wins this set, especially this game where she goes up 6-4, and I'll keep everybody abreast of this while I'm recording this, but if this gets pushed to a third set, I'm sure it'll come down to the wire. Maybe it'll get to a tiebreak. And who knows, it could end up being a classic. Now, Anisimova had a very good tournament to date. And we know about Sabalenka with all of the top-ranked players out. Whether your name is Coco Gauff, whether your name is Jessica Pegula, whether your name is, well, she was 11th, Elena Rybakina, whether your name is Mira Andreeva, whether your name is Emma Navarro, whether your name, go on down the list. A lot of these top 10 women's players out. And I talked about this on Monday. Is this Sabalenka's tournament to lose? And right now, although she's fighting to stay alive to win the second set, but can she outlast Anisimova to get to a Wimbledon final and get that coveted trophy? But there is an interesting wrinkle to this because there is one player that has kind of been lost in all this. Because yes, Coco Gauff did win the French Open, as we saw there last month. And yes, Aryna Sabalenka is number one in the world. And Madison Keys, another one that was also exited stage left, who won the Australian Open and has played well here so far in the first half of the calendar year. But there's been one player that has kind of been forgotten and has been laying in the weeds and makes me wonder whether or not this is going to be her time to shine. And that is the one, Iga Świątek, because Świątek, who has played well in Paris, not this past year, and has struggled pretty much since the middle of last year, whether it's Wimbledon, US Open, and then heading into this year with the Australian and even the French, where the French is her domain. She had won 4 of the past 5 and 3 consecutive French Open titles before this year, until Coco Gauff won. And then now here she is. I don't want to say rising from the dead, but the name that a lot of tennis fans know who she is, and a former number 1 player in her own right. And now it's all in front of her, where she's going to go up against Belinda Bencic in the second match this afternoon in London. And whether or not Świątek has one last hurrah to either meet Anisimova or even Sabalenka, the number 1 women's player in the world, to me, that's going to be fascinating. And I understand for the average sports fan or the good sports fan, they could care less. And I get it. But when you follow the sport and when you stay on top of it and you realize some of the storylines and some of the just overall themes, when we take a look at just players in this regard, where Świątek obviously is a top-ranked player, she's 8th in the world, but had been number 1 and had fallen off considerably, as I mentioned, dating back to last year after winning the French Open. And now here it is. It's her time to finally get to Wimbledon, to a not only final, but to win the whole thing, which she does not have on her resume. She has obviously a bunch of those French Opens and I believe a US Open. She hasn't won down under, and she has not won at the All England Club. So now it's really right in front of her to see if she could beat Bencic, who's had a great run here throughout this tournament, one that a lot of people did not expect, but here she is in the semifinal. Now, could that magic carpet ride for her continue to a final and maybe upset the apple cart and win the whole thing? Or is it a scenario where Świątek knows is that, wait, this is my opportunity to seize, not only to get to a final, but to win a tournament that I have not won? So I find that very intriguing, and certainly one that I'm going to pay attention to over the weekend, and I hope you do too. And for Sabalenka, we're going to have to wait and see whether or not she gets out of this. And right now she's showing a little toughness because, as we all know, Sabalenka is her own worst enemy. She's the type of player that could unravel quickly. She could get in her own head. Obviously, we saw that in the final at the French Open against Coco Gauff. So I'll keep an eye on this. And as a matter of fact, Sabalenka did win that second set 6-4. So now it sets up for what will be, I would think, a riveting and compelling final set. I should probably watch it on a monitor, but then obviously I don't want to take away from what it is that I'm trying to do here, the task at hand to put forth a podcast for you guys and gals. But certainly keep in mind that this one is going to go down to the wire, and we'll see how far we'll get in this match before we sign off between Sabalenka and Anisimova. And then you have the men's side, which is all set up. Tomorrow, you have the 2 matches. You have Carlos Alcaraz, who is the 2-time defending champ, going up against Taylor Fritz, the American, which I'm sure a lot of Americans are going to be rallying around and get the red, white, and blue pom-poms out. And then on the other side, you have Jannik Sinner, the number 1 ranked men's player in the world, go up against Novak Djokovic. And if you ask me, that is a story for tomorrow. Because, yes, we can talk about Taylor Fritz and him being kind of like Belinda Bencic, where I don't want to say the little engine that could, but knowing that there's an opportunity to seize. There's a chance to beat Alcaraz and to put that in his back pocket and on his resume to get to a Grand Slam final, which I believe would be the first for Taylor Fritz, especially here at Wimbledon. But for Novak Djokovic, we all know his resume and we all know what he's been made of. And he's had an excellent tournament to date. He has played stellar. He has looked spry. He loves this surface and he loves playing at this event. Now, the big question is whether or not only does he have one, but does he have two big-time performances ahead of him? Because A, he's going to have to beat Jannik Sinner, which we know that's going to be a tall order, and he was unable to do so last month at the at the French Open. And I understand it's a clay surface, and Sinner, although has played very well, has been dominant here. And if you remember, on Monday, he had a scenario where he was down 0-2 going into the third set, and the third set was tied 2-2 against Grigor Dimitrov, and then Dimitrov had to retire because of a pectoral muscle, and just despondent, obviously emotional, to think that he had Sinner on the ropes. And to me, I would not have been surprised if Sinner would have come back to win that match. And I understand 0-2 looks insurmountable, looks like it's going to be a long road ahead, but remember, in the French Open final, Sinner got the first two against Carlos Alcaraz, and then what happened? Alcaraz came all the way storming back to win the French Open. So I could have seen a role reversal to where Sinner put himself in an 0-2 hole and then would have dug out of that to beat Dimitrov, but obviously we didn't get to see that. And it's unfortunate because Dimitrov, that would have been his shining moment to get to a Grand Slam final, which I believe he has not done. And to beat Sinner, whether it would have been in 3 sets or 4, obviously we're never going to know. And that was just one of the toughest breaks that you'll see of all time for a player that was ahead against the number 1 player in the world to all of a sudden have to step down and just bow out of that match and therefore give Sinner the opportunity to play in the semifinal. Now, as it is, I wonder if for Sinner, and that was in the quarters on Monday, and of course he won yesterday, but for Sinner, you have to wonder whether or not, even though that's behind him, and with Djokovic, with the, not just the aura, but with him playing on that surface, and he knows that surface very well, is that an advantage for Djokovic, which I think it is. Now, I understand you can look at the youth, you can look at the, maybe not the athleticism of a Carlos Alcaraz, but because he's younger and because fresher legs, and not only that, him having a lot of momentum coming into this, as well as Djokovic too. But if this is going to be a thing where if Djokovic is going to win, not to say he's got to put him out in 3 sets, but I think the lesser, the better for Novak in order to win. Because if it goes 5 sets, and let's say Novak does happen to go up 2-love, I would expect Sinner to come back. Now, that's where Novak is going to have to put that final nail in the coffin. But I think this match tomorrow is of the utmost must-watch, fascinating, and I know it's going to be tough for me because I got a couple of errands to run, but I'll try to follow it on my phone and stay on top of it because more so than Fritz and Alcaraz, you would think Alcaraz will probably win. I would think in 4 sets. It could go to a 5th set, but I think Alcaraz is just too overpowering. I know Fritz has a very good serve and has certainly shown what he's made of here in this tournament to date, but at the same time, I would think Alcaraz will certainly do enough to beat Fritz and move on to a Wimbledon final. But this Djokovic-Sinner one certainly has me at a peak where I would love to watch every shot. But because of just circumstance and obviously things that I can't control, I'm not going to be able to watch shot for shot, but I'll certainly do my best to pay attention and watch as much as I can to see whether or not Djokovic could seal the deal and move on to a Wimbledon final, which he would meet Carlos Alcaraz, if it does turn out to be that way, for the 3rd straight year in a Wimbledon final. Now, went 5 sets in a Classic 2 years ago, and then last year, Alcaraz won in straight sets. So, let's see. I think, as a sports fan, this is just a fascinating watch. It's going to be compelling. It's going to be riveting. Hopefully, it is mano-a-mano. Hopefully, it's not a situation where Sinner disposes of Djokovic in 3 sets. And we would expect Alcaraz to do that, or maybe in 4 sets against Fritz, and then come Sunday, who knows what you're going to get. Will you get a 4-setter, maybe a 5, anything close to the epic match, one of the all-time greats that you got at the French Open there last month? Let's see. I mean, again, clay to grass, totally different beast. And Alcaraz has played on the surface and won on the surface. Maybe it's Sinner's time. If Sinner does get past Djokovic, maybe Djokovic upsets the apple cart to win his 25th Grand Slam, which will be historic. But again, that is going to be a big mountain for him to climb in order for him to not just win one. I could see if he had to just beat one of those guys in order for him to win a title, but he's got to beat two. And I think that's going to be a little bit too much to ask for, and especially if it's a 5-set epic Djokovic match where it goes over 5 hours and he ends up beating Sinner. And to think he's going to have to run it back one more time against Alcaraz, I think that is just a tall order. But we shall see. That's the beauty of sports. Stranger things have happened. So you know I'll be all over that as we get into the weekend. And of course, I'll recap it there on Monday. All right, now let me get to a couple other things before I bid adieu, because the sports world is rather tame at the moment. But NBA, as I lace up the high tops, just some news. There was a trade that happened the other day. But to me, the big news was the 3 signings that you saw. One, Devin Booker got an extension to where now his contract is going to look like 5 years and $316 million, which obviously is a lot. It's a ton. And Booker, as we all know, he's been a second-team All-NBA player. He's a guy, one of the very good shooters, great shooters in the league. And a guy that, listen, he's the face of the Phoenix Suns. So, of course, they did him right by giving him that extension. But with that extension, although in the big scheme of things, with that 5 for $315, turns out to be a little bit, $61 million. But that extension that he got in the back end, he got 2 years at $150 million. Or at $142 million, I believe it was. Or somewhere along those lines. Let me pull this up and get this right, people. Jeez. 2 for $145. All right, my apologies there for the mishap. But for Booker to get that extension, so that means in the final 2 years of his deal, he's going to make, in essence, $72.5 million per season, which is more than what SGA will make throughout the course of his contract. Because remember, last week he signed a 4 for $285, which when you average it out, I think it was $71.5 million per year. Well, Booker has topped that, and people could say Booker doesn't deserve that. He's not an MVP caliber player. He's not a top 10. Yes, he's made second team All-NBA, which that alone determines you as a top 10 player in the sport. And he may have done that on more than one occasion. It may have even been a first team All-NBA. I'd have to check that out, and maybe I'll do so as I speak. But I understand there's going to be a faction of people that are going to say there's no way he deserves that. But we all know that is pretty much just looking at it from a standpoint of him being a Phoenix Sun for life. And obviously you're going to have to pay him that way. And yes, he was an All-NBA first team 3 years ago in 2022, and was a third team last year. So top 15 last year, and obviously top 5 3 years ago. When you average it out, he's in the top 10. Or somewhere between 8 and 12 if you want to look at it from that regard. But listen, just like quarterbacks that are going to get paid an overabundance of money, same's going to go for these NBA players. And I know Paolo Banchero got an extension on his rookie deal, 5 for $239, could go up to, I believe, $250 or $270, somewhere along those lines. And Chet Holmgren, the same. He's going to make an upwards of about $250 million over the next 5 years. So you have those two players that are already etched, locked, and written in stone for the Magic and the Thunder, respectively. So that's been the big storyline here in the NBA over the last few days. And the Norman Powell trade, I know if you're a Miami Heat fan, do you jump up and down, jump for joy that you got a guy, 31 years of age, had a big-time year last year, averaged 21 points a year, provides defense, could shoot from 3, and obviously he didn't ever give up a lot. I mean, Kevin Love and Ryan Anderson, it's a 3-team trade to Utah where the Clippers were involved. John Collins goes to LA, and now the Heat, I guess, could look at the trio of Powell, Tyler Hero, and Bam Adebayo as maybe a little bit of a force there in the East, and of course that's tongue-in-cheek. But yeah, I'm not going to go crazy over that trade. But listen, Miami gets a very good player coming back, but is that going to be impactful? Understood in a very underwhelming East next year, as we know, with the Celtics and Pacers taking a step back because of the 2 key injuries. The Knicks, who knows if they're going to be a team that's the favorite coming out of the East with the Cavaliers. You would think those two teams would be at the top. Orlando making some strides with Desmond Bane. Miami thinks that they can maybe be a top 6 seed in the Eastern Conference. And now it's a scenario where, who knows, maybe Miami still has another trick up their sleeve in order for them to be a part of an Eastern Conference that certainly is wide open going into next year. And then you also had a sad passing, Frank Layden, who was a Utah Jazz coach in the 80s, a guy that certainly was a character, also became the GM later on, had a son, Scott Layden, who was a part of the Knicks franchise many moons ago, passed away at the age of 93, certainly a character, good guy, unfortunately succumbed. I don't know what the cause of death was for Frank Layden, but I'm sure a lot of thoughts, prayers, and condolences go out not only to the Layden family, to the Jazz family, NBA, etc., but I'm sure they're going to commemorate come the start of the season. And Utah, obviously, a lot of wheeling and dealing with that franchise and what they've done here, not only just this offseason, but in the past offseasons, just trying to retool and get themselves back to the prominent land as far as them being a team that is going to be amongst a very loaded West, but still, they got a lot of work to do. But Frank Layden passing away there at 93. And then as far as the NHL, as I lace up the skates, the new CBA now official through 2030. And look at that. If Major League Baseball, to Rob Manfred and to Tony Clark and the powers that be, can you take a page out of the NHL? They had another year, September of next year, for the current CBA to expire. But they said, let's scrap it, let's rip this up, throw it away, and let's get a new one intact. Now, mind you, the NHL's had their issues. 04, lockouts in 95, missing seasons in the 04-05 season. So they do have blood on their hands when it comes to Gary Bettman and the Players Association. But they were able to work out well ahead of time. What is it, about 15 months in advance to have a deal in place to where they have a CBA, I believe 7-year contract. So the max, you can't get the 8-year deal, which I believe was the max prior to this now new CBA. Which, all right, so they shaved 1 year off of trying to get that 8-year max deal for the current player. Now it's 7 years. But the big thing that you have here with the CBA is now through 2030, and who knows, maybe they'll revisit at that time. It's not an 82-game schedule, it's an 84-game schedule. And the reason being is that they're going to include the division rivals to where they're going to be able to play 4 times a year in your division. In the past, they weren't able to do that because with the way the schedule was imbalanced, the East, let's say, for instance, if I'm going to choose the Islanders, obviously they're going to play the Western Conference. They're going to play them 2 times, 1 home and 1 in their opposing arena. So that's 16 games, so that's 32 games there. Then you have the other division that you got to deal with in the Atlantic. You got to play those teams at least 3 times, so 8 times 3 is 24. And then you're going to play some of those teams in your division 4 times, but then you got to play other teams in your division 3 times to balance it out to where they're going to play 82 games a year. So that meant a couple of years ago, and I believe even last year off the top of my head, I have to think about that. For instance, the Islanders played the Rangers 3 times. That's a disgrace. They got to play each other 4 times, 2 at Madison Square Garden and 2 at UBS, and that goes across the board, whether that's Philadelphia, whether that's the Devils, whether that's the Capitals, whether that's the Flyers. Right across the board, the division should play at least 4 times. That's like the NFL having, all right, well, the Steelers are going to play the Ravens twice, but no, they're only going to go to Cincinnati once, but they'll host Cleveland once because we can't have them play twice a year. So that's why the NHL had to increase the schedule 2 games. Now it's going to run through 2030. That could change, and maybe with a little tweaking, they could do a shift there with the schedule where they'll play less games in the other division, but play the 4 games in the same division, which they probably should have done right out of the gate, because I understand you want to play the Western Conference teams at least twice. So that means Connor McDavid could go to your town in the Eastern Conference at least once so you get to see him play, or Nathan McKinnon for that matter. So there's no way that you could have a Western Conference team, let's say they'll come to your arena, but this year you won't have to go out to their arena, but then the following year, you go to their arena and they're not going to come to your arena, which they did back in the mid-2000s, because the way the schedule was, it was all screwed up. So where they fixed that there in the early 2010s in that collective bargaining agreement at that time. So now with an 84-game schedule, I know it's 2 more games, and I know that's good for the rank and file in the league, so that means 2 more paychecks. But let's see how that plays out. Remember, back in the day when it was 21 teams in the NHL, that's right. Prior to 1991, I believe, there were 21 teams in the NHL. And how many teams there are now? Add 11 more teams to that. So you only played 80 games at that time, where now it's 84. So how much the NHL has evolved since then just goes to show you where they've landed here in 2025 as opposed to what it was 35 years ago. So that's something to pay attention to as you get closer, and obviously at the start of the season when you take a look at the schedule and who's going to play who and how many times, etc., especially in the division. So you can get to look at, when are the 2 times that the Islanders are going to go to Madison Square Garden, or when the Flyers are coming up here, or the Capitals, you want to see Ovechkin, so you get to see that. And as far as deals, Edmonton made another trade with the Tampa Bay Lightning as they get Isaac Howard, a young prospect who is the current Hobey Baker Award winner for the best college player in the sport. And they traded him for Sam O'Reilly. Now, is that enough, or is that a building block to keep Connor McDavid? And I know that has not been much of a story here because it's not as if the Oilers have put out an offer for McDavid. As we all know, he's going into his final year as an Edmonton Oiler and then contested free agency waters after next year. And even though the Oilers could offer him big-time money, and I would think he's probably grandfathered in, even under the new CBA, maybe it's 7 years, I don't know. They could probably offer him more money. But with that being said, is Isaac Howard enough? Now, they've got rid of guys like Evander Kane, as you know, and Corey Perry, who's now in LA, Kane in Vancouver, and a couple other guys, Connor Brown and Victor Arvidsson, but they still have to bring in some reinforcements. They still have to bring in some more players, especially a goaltender and maybe a rock-solid or 2 defensemen in order for this team to get to the Holy Grail, for McDavid to raise that cup over his shoulders, because anything less than that, he's probably not going to sign. So they could bring in all the young players and, yes, look at this team maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, but all that matters for McDavid, as he said in his press conference, is this year or this coming year. So if they're not going to bring in that stud goalie, or like I mentioned, not one, they need to bring like 2 rock-solid defensemen that are going to be able to not only keep the offensive players out of their zone, but also going to be physical. And I understand the stay-at-home defenseman is almost a thing of the past, like the Rod Langways of the world, guys like that. To me, they seem to be few and far between, because I understand it's all about offense in this day and age. And yes, you do have defensive defensemen. I'm not trying to say the league is bereft of them, but for Edmonton to get to that next level and win a cup and to appease McDavid, they're going to have to do a little bit more than bringing in a young guy that's probably going to be on the team in 5 years. But the point is, will McDavid be? So you got to keep that in mind as we move it along. And speaking of young players, Gavin McKenna, who is going to be the likely number 1 pick of next year, generational pick in the vein of the likes of Macklin Celebrini and Connor Bedard of the Sharks and the Blackhawks, respectively. He committed to Penn State, so he's going to take his talents to Happy Valley for 1 year and then get drafted a la James Higgins, the kid from Long Island who went to Boston College and played a year there and now got drafted by the Bruins. Now, I'm not trying to compare Higgins to McKenna, but you get my drift when it comes to the route that McKenna's taken at this point in his early part of his career, to go to college as opposed to doing something else, KHL or whatever other outlet that he could go, or maybe even just jumping ship to go to the pros as of this year, which obviously would have been way too far-fetched to happen. But you got that going on. And then the Flyers re-signed Cam York, 5 years, $25 million for what that's worth. So the Flyers got their defenseman as they keep in Philadelphia. And besides that, people, I got nothing else. Nothing with the NFL, nothing with anything else that's going on. UFC, I think there's a bout coming up next week where I believe it's Dustin Poirier, if I'm not mistaken. But that's not until next Saturday. Maybe I'll touch on that, because right now the sports landscape is not barren, but you may see a tumbleweed in the back, and you may see some clouds forming where the storm is coming, where there could be a lot of rain, but not a lot of thunder when it comes to maybe just some showers, light showers. Not a lot of thunder when it comes to your sports talk, but nevertheless, I will be here to bring you anything and everything that's happening. And thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what's happening in the wonderful world of sports. And like I mentioned at the top, please subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. The website is JAYREELZ.com, and of course the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, where I posted up another critique video this morning, so definitely check it out. LeBron coming to the Knicks? What? You definitely want to peep it, as I got a thing or two to say about that. So please, tap in, lock in, hit that subscribe button. I would sincerely appreciate that. And of course, if you have a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or JAYREELZ on Instagram. JAYREELZ1, just a number, on Twitter, and the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. In the blood, in the DNA. And if you couldn't tell by the past hour, even with not a lot going on in sports, then you're not paying attention. You're not dialed in. You're not on top of it. And if that's the case, you got to come back on Monday, because I'm going to have a lot more for you then. And it's not even just a podcast every Monday and Thursday. It's the live stream every Wednesday at high noon. It's the critique videos. It's the commentary videos. It's the vlogs, sports or lifestyle. I got you covered on the channel here on YouTube and all points beyond. So please, people, don't budge. Stay right there. Stay in tune to what's going on, because as an independent podcaster, content creator that I am, trying to do my best to blaze a trail and a path in this space and to earn a living doing this full time. Whatever help that you can provide for this little engine I could, I'd be sincerely grateful. And you know I am to those who do follow, whether you're my day ones or this is your first day. So please continue to do so, because you know, as long as I sit in front of this camera and microphone, I will deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.